In a move that promises to blend high-stakes sports entertainment with national commemoration, former President Donald Trump has announced plans to host an Ultimate Fighting Championship UFC bout on the historic grounds of the White House next year. The unexpected revelation made during a rally at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines on Thursday is slated to be a marquee event among a series of celebrations marking America's 250th birthday. Trump indicated that UFC President Dana White, a longtime friend and political ally who introduced Trump at last year's Republican National Convention, would be organizing the mixed martial arts spectacle. "We have a lot of land there," Trump stated, envisioning a full fight that could draw an audience of up to 25,000 people. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt echoed the sentiment on X, confirming Trump was dead serious about the plan and proclaiming, "It's going to be epic." This isn't Trump's first foray into the world of professional fighting. He has been a consistent attendee at UFC events, most recently in Newark, New Jersey in June, and even hosted a UFC match at his Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City back in 2001. The proposed White House fight is positioned as just one component of a broader initiative to celebrate America's semi-quincentennial, commemorating the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Trump outlined a sweeping vision for the America 250 celebration, stating that every one of our national park, battlefields, and historic sites are going to have special events in honor of America 250. The climactic festivities are slated for July 4, 2026, and will include a grand festival on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., transforming the nation's capital into a hub of patriotic observance. The announcement came amidst a politically charged backdrop in Iowa following what was described as a significant policy win for Trump. This legislative success has reportedly fueled optimism within the Republican camp, while Democrats view a related megabill as a critical, albeit potentially challenging, pathway to their own political resurgence. The political landscape remains fluid, with both parties strategizing around the implications of such high-profile events and legislative outcomes. Adding another layer to the week's events, Trump also addressed a recent controversy, denying that he had knowingly used an anti-Semitic term. This clarification came as part of the ongoing public discourse surrounding his statements and actions, highlighting the multifaceted nature of his continued presence in the national conversation. As the nation looks towards its 250th anniversary, the prospect of a UFC fight on the White House grounds underscores a unique intersection of sports, politics, and historical commemoration. This blend of spectacle and patriotism aims to galvanize public engagement even as the political currents continue to shift. The coming months will undoubtedly reveal more about the logistical and societal implications of these ambitious plans, setting the stage for what promises to be a memorable and perhaps unconventional celebration of American history. As the summer of 2025 unfolds, the intricate dance of global economics and geopolitics continues to be choreographed by high-stakes decisions emanating from Washington, D.C. From contentious debates over monetary policy and the escalating rhetoric surrounding international trade to the very real human cost of ongoing conflicts, the current administration's policies are shaping a complex landscape. At the heart of these developments lies a persistent push for radical economic shifts and a redefinition of America's role on the world stage, with each move carrying profound implications for financial markets, international relations, and everyday lives. A central pillar of this dynamic is President Donald Trump's relentless campaign to pressure Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell into significant interest rate cuts. For months, the president has publicly assailed Powell, most recently citing a claim that the Fed's refusal to slash its key rate is costing the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars annually in interest payments on its burgeoning debt. On his Truth Social site, Trump's handwritten note to Powell declared, "You are, as usual, too late. You have cost the USA a fortune and continue to do so. You should lower the interest rate by a lot. Hundreds of billions of dollars being lost. No inflation." He even suggested a drastic 3 percentage point cut, bringing the key short-term rate from its current range of 4.25% to 4.5% down to roughly 1.25%, claiming such a move would save the government a staggering $900 billion a year. While analysts generally concede that lower rates would in the short term likely reduce the cost of Treasury debt, as noted by John Canavan, lead financial market analyst at Oxford Economics, and Wells Fargo senior economist Mike Pugliese, this assertion comes with significant caveats. Experts like Benga Aguilar, chief economist of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, suggest Trump is significantly overstating the potential savings. More critically, they underscore that the Federal Reserve operates as an independent agency with a dual mandate from Congress to foster maximum employment and maintain price stability. Its role is not to simply make borrowing cheaper for the federal government. Indeed, Fed Chair Powell in recent congressional testimony acknowledged that the Fed's preferred inflation measure, now at 2.3%, has edged closer to its 2% target. However, he pointed to the expected meaningful increase in inflation in the coming months, largely attributed to Trump's newly imposed tariffs, as a reason for the Fed's cautious stance. The central bank's pause on rate cuts since late last year following a pandemic-related inflation spike reflects this wait-and-see approach. Furthermore, the mechanics of debt refinancing are complex. While a 3 percentage point cut could theoretically save the U.S. Treasury over $100 billion annually on the approximately $9 trillion in debt coming due this year, such a massive unprecedented cut during a period of relative economic stability could backfire. Only about 20% of the Treasury's outstanding debt is in short-term securities directly impacted by the Fed's benchmark rate. The majority held in longer-term bonds is influenced more by broader economic outlooks, inflation expectations, and investor confidence. As Canavan warns, if markets perceive the Fed is cutting rates due to political pressure rather than economic fundamentals, investors might demand higher rates on long-term bonds to offset future inflation risks, potentially eroding any short-term savings and, as Aguilar puts it, undermining the Fed's crucial credibility. This brings us directly to the administration's aggressive trade posture, which is simultaneously contributing to the Federal Reserve's inflationary concerns and shaping global commerce. A critical July 9 deadline looms for numerous U.S. trade partners as President Trump prepares to impose new, higher tariffs on their exports. Letters notifying countries of these new rates, ranging from 10% to a potential 70%, are already being dispatched, with the new duties set to take effect on August 1. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated that around 100 partners could face a minimum reciprocal rate of 10%, anticipating a flurry of last-minute deals. While the administration has focused on striking new pacts, only a handful have materialized. Notably, trade tensions with China appear to be easing slightly, with the U.S. having removed export restrictions on chip design software and ethane. This follows a May agreement to work towards a larger trade deal allowing companies like Synopsys and Cadence to resume selling their crucial chip design tools to Chinese customers. However, other relationships are proving more contentious. Vietnam, despite securing a deal, will see its imports face a 20% tariff, lower than the initially threatened 46%. But with a higher 40% duty for goods suspected of transshipping from other countries like China. Negotiations with Japan have reportedly soured, with Trump threatening steep tariffs of 30%, 35%, or whatever the number is that we determine, criticizing their very tough and very spoiled approach. The European Union has signaled openness to a 10% universal tariff but seeks exemptions for key sectors like pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, with talks expected to continue through the weekend as Trump has previously threatened a 50% tariff on the bloc. Canada, on the other hand, has made headway by scrapping its digital services tax, leading to resumed trade talks aimed at a mid-July deal. These expansive economic policies are unfolding against a backdrop of escalating national debt. The president's big beautiful budget bill is projected to add an estimated $3.3 trillion to the red ink, pushing the national debt beyond $36 trillion. This fiscal reality intertwines with the debate over interest rates and the broader economic strategy. Beyond the economic sphere, the administration's foreign policy is also drawing significant scrutiny, particularly concerning the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Despite President Trump's repeated campaign promises to end the war in one day and his recent public calls for Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop, the conflict not only continues but accelerates. Reports from Kyiv detail intensified drone and missile attacks, while Ukraine's top commander warns of a new Russian summer offensive involving 695,000 troops. The human and material cost remains staggering, with Russia sustaining between 35,000 and 45,000 casualties monthly and billions of dollars in equipment destroyed. Yet Putin shows no inclination towards a ceasefire or negotiation. Critics argue that the U.S. government's actions or perceived lack thereof are inadvertently emboldening Putin, leading him to believe he can still achieve a full conquest of Ukraine. This stance marks a significant shift, with some observers suggesting the U.S. is effectively switching sides by creating incentives for Russia to continue its aggression. In essence, the current administration is pursuing a multifaceted agenda characterized by aggressive economic nationalism and a re-evaluation of international alliances. The push for lower interest rates, the imposition of broad tariffs, and the evolving stance on global conflicts are not isolated events but interconnected threads in a larger tapestry of policy. While proponents argue these measures are designed to bolster American economic strength and reset global dynamics, critics point to potential pitfalls: increased national debt, inflationary pressures, risks to the independence of critical institutions like the Federal Reserve, and a perceived weakening of alliances that could destabilize international order. As the July deadlines pass and the impacts of these decisions ripple through economies and geopolitics, the coming months will undoubtedly reveal the true extent of their long-term consequences, shaping not just the American narrative but the trajectory of the global landscape. As the United States stands on the precipice of its semi-quincentennial, a landmark 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the nation finds itself grappling with a potent mix of legislative triumphs, audacious political challenges, and deeply entrenched cultural divides. This Independence Day week has underscored just how profoundly political polarization is shaping America's future, from the halls of Congress to the very narrative of its founding. The week culminated with a significant legislative victory for President Donald Trump as House Republicans, after overcoming multiple setbacks and an 8-hour filibuster by Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, propelled his signature One Big Beautiful Bill Act to final passage. The $4.5 trillion package, largely focused on extending tax breaks from 2017, includes new deductions for tips, overtime pay, and a $6,000 deduction for older adults. It also allocates a hefty $350 billion to national security, the president's deportation agenda, and the development of a Golden Dome defensive system. To offset these costs, the bill slashes $1.2 trillion from Medicaid and food stamps through new work requirements and rolls back green energy tax credits, drawing sharp criticism from Democrats who labeled it trickle-down cruelty. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates the package will add $3.3 trillion to the deficit over the next decade and leave 11.8 million more people without health coverage, making it a defining measure of the Trump administration's second term and a stark repudiation of recent Democratic agendas. The contentious passage of this bill immediately triggered a dramatic response from tech titan Elon Musk, who, amidst an ongoing feud with President Trump over the legislation's phase-out of electric vehicle tax credits, reiterated his vow to launch a new political party. Dubbed the America Party, Musk declared on X, "If this insane spending bill passes, the America Party will be formed the next day." While Musk frames this as a necessary alternative to the Democrat-Republican uni-party, experts caution that such an endeavor is fraught with immense challenges. Brett Capel, a veteran election lawyer, highlighted the thicket of complicated state laws and time-consuming ballot access rules, noting that building a national party could take years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Despite Musk's estimated net worth exceeding $350 billion and his significant past political spending, including $277 million in the 2024 election cycle primarily through his America PAC, the complexities of navigating 50 different state laws and federal campaign finance regulations present a formidable barrier. Once a party gains national recognition, donors like Musk would face FEC caps, though super PACs remain an avenue for unlimited contributions. This move signals a potential expensive return to the political fray for Musk, even as he previously hinted at scaling back his involvement. Coinciding with this legislative drama, President Trump used the eve of July 4th to kick off the countdown to the semi-quincentennial at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, promising a great American state fair on the National Mall and even suggesting an ultimate fighting championship bout at the White House. This event, however, amplified growing concerns among organizers and historians that today's hyperpolarized politics threaten to derail the anniversary's unifying potential. Fears have mounted following the Trump administration's funding cuts and leadership changes at federal cultural institutions like the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. The bipartisan America 250 group tasked with coordinating the national commemoration has also seen key positions filled by Fox News and Trump campaign veterans, leading to a pivot towards flag-focused programs and ethical questions surrounding sponsorships. The politicization echoes the 1976 bicentennial, which, despite popular memory of tall ships and star-spangled patriotism, was also deeply inflected by the divisions of the Vietnam War and Watergate eras, including the disbandment of a bipartisan commission and anti-corporate counter-efforts. Yet that anniversary ultimately spurred a boom in public interest in history and fresh scholarship. Today, however, historians like Karen Wolf of Brown University worry that 2026 might not achieve a similar experience and a legacy, especially with federal agencies supporting history facing cuts and a redirection of funds towards projects like Mr. Trump's planned National Garden of American Heroes. This shift has disproportionately impacted institutions dedicated to Black history, with Noel Trent, president of the Museum of African American History in Boston, stating, "We are being told that our stories no longer serve the interests of the United States." Meanwhile, the administration has tapped conservative institutions like Hillsdale College and PragerU to shape its semi-quincentennial history narrative, while the Smithsonian faces pressure to conform to a patriotic history agenda as the nation looks ahead to its 250th birthday. The interplay of high-stakes legislation, the ambitious political aspirations of tech billionaires, and a deeply contested national narrative underscores a critical juncture. The coming months will reveal whether the spirit of unity and shared purpose championed by figures like filmmaker Ken Burns, who believes the soaring principles of the Declaration can transcend divisions, can prevail over the forces of partisan polarization. The challenge remains to foster a commemoration that acknowledges the nation's complex past while forging a path forward that truly embodies the promise of our shared future. 250. As the United States marks 165 days into Donald Trump's second term, the nation's economic landscape is proving to be a turbulent sea for financial markets, defined largely by the administration's aggressive and often unpredictable trade policies. With inflation currently at 2.4%, unemployment at 4.1%, and the S&P 500 up a modest 3.8% since the presidential inauguration, these top-line figures belie a deeper undercurrent of anxiety and volatility that has gripped investors and consumers alike. The defining characteristic of this period has been the president's re-engagement with high reciprocal tariffs, a strategy that initially sent markets reeling in early April following his sweeping Liberation Day announcement. While a partial reversal of these levies brought some recovery to share prices, which are now just above their Election Day levels, the specter of impending trade wars continues to cast a long shadow. This uncertainty, particularly around the scope and permanence of tariffs, is widely seen as a primary driver of investor fear, threatening to stoke inflation and depress economic growth. Liz Saunders, chief investment strategist at Charles Schwab, notes a lot of complacency among investors who risk being spooked again should higher tariffs than expected be revived. Perhaps the most significant casualty of this policy approach has been the US dollar, which has depreciated sharply since March. Fears surrounding the economic impact of tariffs, coupled with rumors of a new lower interest rate favoring Federal Reserve Chair, have contributed to this decline. The Liberation Day announcement in April saw the greenback fall further, and despite a slight recovery, it has continued to slide since mid-May. This weakening, with the dollar falling 10.8% in the first half of the year according to the US dollar index, marks its worst start to a year in half a century. Kenneth Rogoff, a Harvard University economics professor and former IMF chief economist, unequivocally states that Donald Trump is a catalyst for this trend, suggesting the dollar's long-held exorbitant privilege as the world's reserve currency is eroding. This status, which has historically allowed the U.S. to borrow heavily and enjoy cheaper imports, is now being undermined by the unpredictability of the tariff program, which makes it costly for businesses to adjust supply chains and discourages investment. John Whitaker, senior teaching fellow in economics at Lancaster University, points out that the unpredictability of the tariffs is really sapping investor confidence. Foreign central banks have already begun selling off U.S. treasuries, often opting for gold instead, tarnishing the dollar's reputation as the ultimate safe asset and leaving the financial system more vulnerable. The nation's fiscal health also remains a major concern, compounding the dollar's woes. U.S. government debt has surged to $36 trillion, an alarming 123% of GDP, the highest since 1946. This figure is projected to worsen, with the recently passed Big Beautiful Bill adding another $3 trillion over the next decade. Such fiscal profligacy has led to a predictable consequence: rising borrowing costs. The interest rate on 10-year U.S. government debt, or its yield, has climbed sharply from 0.5% in mid-2020 to 4.3% currently. As government bond yields rise, so do interest rates on mortgages and corporate borrowing, adding further strain to the economy. Rogoff warns that our debt policy is just off the rails, accelerating a trend of moving away from the dollar's global importance, which he believes could be very costly over the long run. Economists largely agree that the president's tariffs will eventually push consumer prices higher, though the effect has been modest so far, with core inflation slipping to 2.4% in May from 3% in January. However, with tariffs as high as 141% on certain items like appliances, electronics, and military uniforms, a significant climb in inflation over time is anticipated. This looming threat has already begun to impact consumer sentiment, which has tanked since January. Americans are bracing for higher prices and worrying about potential job losses as businesses face rising costs. Initially confined to Democratic-leaning areas, this pessimism is now evident even among Republicans. This widespread gloom is translating into tangible economic effects, with retail sales dropping for the second consecutive month in May, marking the first back-to-back decline since late 2023. Overall consumer spending growth has also slowed to its lowest rate since 2020. Despite these headwinds, the labor market has shown some resilience. The unemployment rate initially fell in January amid strong hiring and wage growth, though job creation has since slowed and the unemployment rate has ticked up slightly to 4.2%. Some sectors, particularly manufacturing, have begun cutting workers, and the federal government itself shed 22,000 roles as part of an efficiency drive. Yet the overall unemployment rate remains low. The first quarter of 2025 saw GDP shrink at an annualized rate of 0.5%, the first decline in 3 years. This contraction was complicated by a rush to import goods and build inventories ahead of the tariffs taking effect, which paradoxically boosted consumption. Ben Hackett of Hackett Associates warns that if the tariff freeze disappears and high tariffs are reimposed, a short recession is almost certain. Even the cryptocurrency market, which Donald Trump had pledged to make America's Bitcoin superpower, has not been immune to the tariff turbulence. While the White House established a strategic Bitcoin reserve in March, Bitcoin prices fell after the tariff announcements in April. However, momentum picked up later with a trade truce with China on May 12, sending Bitcoin to a record high, leaving it above its level when the president took office. This mixed performance underscores the broader economic uncertainty. As the July 9 deadline for trade deals approaches, the U.S. economy finds itself in a precarious wait-and-see mode, as described by Liz and Saunders. The instability in policy driven by the administration's tariff agenda and fiscal trajectory has led many firms to impose a timeout on hiring and investment. While most analysts still believe the economy can avoid a full-blown recession if the job market holds, the current trajectory points to a significant softening of growth. Kenneth Rogoff encapsulates the gravity of the situation, stating that the current economic climate represents an inflection point in the global economy and economic history, the biggest such shift in over 50 years since Nixon decoupled the dollar from gold in 1971. The coming weeks, particularly around the July 9 deadline, will be critical in determining whether the U.S. navigates this period with further economic softening or slides into a more significant downturn with profound implications for its global standing and the stability of the international financial system. In a dramatic expansion of federal authority and military involvement, the United States has militarized nearly one-third of its southern border with Mexico, a move that has ignited a firestorm of controversy even as border crossings plummet to a six-decade low. This unprecedented escalation, stemming from a national emergency declared by President Donald Trump on his first day in office, marks a significant shift in U.S. border enforcement strategy, coinciding with intense debate in Washington over a sweeping legislative package championed by the administration. The U.S. military has posted thousands of restricted area signs in English and Spanish across the New Mexico desert and western Texas, declaring long stretches of the border under the supervision of nearby military bases. This initiative empowers U.S. troops to detain individuals who enter the country illegally, a measure that civil rights advocates and legal experts argue sidesteps the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which prohibits military involvement in civilian law enforcement. Currently, at least 7,600 members of the armed forces patrol these zones, which now span 230 miles from Fort Hancock, Texas through El Paso and westward across New Mexico, with an additional 250-mile zone recently added in Texas' Rio Grande Valley and plans for another near Yuma, Arizona. U.S. authorities contend these national defense areas are crucial for closing enforcement gaps and bolstering the fight against sophisticated human smuggling networks and brutal drug cartels. However, the militarization faces fierce opposition and is already being challenged in court. Civil rights advocates, humanitarian aid groups, and even outdoor enthusiasts are protesting being blocked from public lands, raising concerns about transparency and human rights. Abby Carpenter, a leader of a search and rescue group for missing migrants, voiced a grim concern, stating, "Maybe there are more deaths, but we don't know," highlighting the potential for unseen tragedies in these sweltering, restricted desert areas. The impact on individuals has been swift and severe. More than 1,400 migrants have been charged with trespassing on military territory, facing a possible 18-month prison sentence for a first offense in addition to the 6 months for illegal entry. While federal public defenders are challenging the legality of these new military zones, arguing their designation without congressional authorization is a matter of staggering and unprecedented political significance, some convictions have already been secured. Ryan Ellison, the top federal prosecutor in New Mexico, noted that repeat offenders would be on clear notice. Meanwhile, Border Patrol arrests along the southern border have dropped dramatically this year to their lowest level in 6 decades, including a 30% decrease in June from the prior month. On June 28, only 137 arrests were made, a stark contrast to late 2023 when daily arrests often topped 10,000. While the administration might point to this decline as a success of the new strategy, critics like American Civil Liberties Union attorney Rebecca Sheff warned that the federal government is testing a more punitive approach that could be expanded border-wide, raising very concerning implications for civil liberties. Local reactions to the military buffer are mixed. In rural Luna County, New Mexico, where a strong culture of individual liberty coexists with a desire for border security, farmers like James Johnson, a fourth-generation onion grower, support the increased military presence, seeing it as trying to give some teeth to border security. Yet hunters and hikers, including Luna County Commissioner Ray Trejo, fear being locked out of cherished public lands and express concern about military personnel's de-escalation training when encountering armed citizens. Trejo, a former English as a second language teacher, also found the military trespassing charges inhumane for migrants simply seeking work. Even rancher Russell Johnson, who welcomes the new zone, noted he hasn't seen the anticipated military presence, suggesting that for many the primary change has been the little extra signage. This significant border policy shift unfolds concurrently with a major legislative push by the Trump administration in Washington. The Senate has begun intense debate on President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill, a comprehensive package addressing his second-term priorities. This megabill, which passed the House by a single vote, is being pushed through the reconciliation process, allowing it to pass the Senate with a simple majority. However, the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) has estimated that the bill would add a staggering $3.3 trillion to the national debt, raising significant fiscal concerns. Beyond domestic spending, the administration's broader agenda, as reflected in recent headlines surrounding the megabill, includes a strong focus on foreign policy and international relations. At the recent NATO summit in The Hague, President Trump touted a new Hague defense commitment where allies pledged to dramatically increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, potentially adding over $1 trillion annually to common defense. Trump hailed this as a monumental win for the United States, which he believes has long carried more than its fair share. Yet his refusal to unequivocally commit to NATO's Article 5, the core tenet of collective defense, stating "depends on your definition," has undoubtedly raised eyebrows among allies. The administration also recently navigated a bipartisan effort in the House to impeach President Trump over U.S. strikes on Iran, which was overwhelmingly rejected, and the president reportedly had a firm and direct conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to sustain a ceasefire, specifically stating Israel, "Do not drop those bombs." As the U.S. navigates these complex domestic and international landscapes, the expansion of militarized zones along the southern border represents a profound redefinition of national security and immigration enforcement. Coupled with the administration's ambitious legislative agenda and assertive foreign policy, these actions collectively signal a period of significant policy transformation. The legal challenges to military authority, the ongoing humanitarian concerns, and the fiscal implications of the megabill will undoubtedly shape public discourse and policy for years to come, leaving many to watch closely how these unprecedented measures ultimately reshape the fabric of American society and its role on the global stage. In a geopolitical landscape increasingly defined by rapid shifts and unexpected maneuvers, recent events have cast a stark light on the intricate and often paradoxical nature of high-stakes diplomacy, particularly when intertwined with ongoing conflicts. As Russian missiles continue to pound Ukrainian cities, a series of phone calls involving former U.S. President Donald Trump, coupled with a surprising halt in Pentagon arms shipments, have sent ripples through international relations and global markets, prompting analysts to question the true intent and impact of these seemingly disparate developments. The Robert Lansing Institute, in a report published on July 4, 2025, has drawn a concerning correlation between Donald Trump's high-level communications with Vladimir Putin and subsequent escalations in Russian military activity against Ukraine. This pattern, observed in multiple verified instances, suggests that what appears to be diplomatic engagement may in fact serve as a precursor to intensified aggression. For example, direct or indirect communications between Trump and Putin in late May and June 2025 were reportedly followed within 24 to 72 hours by massive drone and missile strikes targeting Ukrainian infrastructure and civilian areas. The July 3, 2025 hour-long phone call between the two leaders, which Trump later described as disappointing with no progress, was followed late that night into July 4 by one of the war's largest aerial assaults. 550 Shahid drones and 11 ballistic missiles struck Kyiv and several regions, injuring at least 23 civilians and damaging critical infrastructure. This consistent sequence, diplomatically significant Trump-Putin contact followed by a Russian shock and awe operation, raises serious questions about Russia's motives. Analysts at the Lansing Institute suggest several reasons behind this timing. The Kremlin may be using Trump's outreach as a testing probe to gauge U.S. domestic political tolerance for further aggression, observing whether Washington restrains its condemnation or response. Additionally, Russia might view Trump as a political ally or instrument capable of undermining transatlantic unity, pressuring Ukraine into territorial concessions, or blocking future military aid in Congress. Escalating strikes immediately after a call could serve to deter Western responses by showcasing Russia's escalation dominance. Furthermore, it functions as a potent form of psychological warfare, sending a message to Ukraine and the West that Trump is our indirect asset in diplomacy with him equals violence, thereby weakening trust in any diplomatic overtures linked to him and sowing disarray among allies. This effectively weaponizes negotiation, a classic Russian tactic of speak while shooting, aiming to erode Ukrainian morale and discredit Western mediation efforts. For Russia, these engagements buy time, confusion, and indirect cover, allowing Putin to sow divisions within NATO and escalate with minimal international cost under the guise of peace talk smokescreens. While these calls might enhance Trump's image as a peacemaker among isolationist voters, the direct correlation with violence risks alienating moderate voters and damaging credibility with U.S. allies, leaving Ukraine and the West facing escalated attacks and heightened uncertainty. Adding another layer of complexity to the unfolding situation, the Pentagon's surprise decision on July 2 to suspend critical weapons shipments to Ukraine, including Patriot Stingers and secure communications equipment, has rattled defense markets and European capitals alike. Officials cited U.S. stockpiles falling below a critical 20% threshold for American military readiness after 2 years of drawdowns. A defense industry consultant speaking anonymously clarified that this was fundamentally a staff-driven decision based on legitimate stockpile concerns. However, the timing coinciding with Russia's largest aerial assault of the war created a perfect storm, as noted by a veteran State Department analyst. This suspension affects precisely the air defense systems Ukraine desperately needs, despite President Trump assuring Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a 40-minute Independence Day call that he wanted to help with air defense. No immediate commitment to resume shipments has materialized. The geopolitical turbulence has inevitably spilled over into financial markets. RTX Corp, the manufacturer of Patriot missiles, has seen its stock underperform, dropping 3% against the S&P 500's 1% gain, reflecting investor concerns over the shipment pause's impact on its substantial backlog. Conversely, Northrop Grumman, with less direct exposure to Ukraine, has outperformed. A senior portfolio manager at a major investment firm observed that the market is still processing what this means for the defense sector, suggesting that European missile houses like MBDA, Rheinmetall and Thales could potentially benefit from accelerated European self-sufficiency initiatives. Market analysts are currently weighing three scenarios: a 50% probability of a short pause followed by reduced deliveries, which would modestly boost defense top lines; a 30% bullish case involving a rapid reversal through a White House waiver and new appropriations, potentially boosting earnings per share for major contractors; and a 20% concerning scenario of a prolonged freeze due to Republican divisions, which could dramatically impact energy markets, with oil jumping $10 to $15 per barrel. For sophisticated investors, a barbell strategy favoring European primes and U.S. Tier 2 suppliers focused on drone systems is emerging, while the volatility in Brent December 2025 calls is seen as remarkably cheap given the asymmetric upside to potential supply shocks. Upcoming catalysts, including a July 9 U.S. tariff deadline, the Pentagon's mid-July stockpile review, and the late July Ramstein Defense Contact Group meeting, are expected to provide further clarity. Beyond the immediate crisis in Eastern Europe, Donald Trump's diplomatic ambitions extend to the Middle East, where he is actively pushing for new normalization agreements. Following a 12-day Iran-Israel war, the concept of an Abraham alliance has gained traction, with billboards across Israel featuring Arab leaders alongside Trump proclaiming it's time for a new Middle East. While the original Abraham Accords in 2020 normalized ties between Israel and countries like the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, forging similar agreements with Syria and Lebanon presents a far more delicate challenge. Neil Quilliam, an associate fellow at Chatham House, highlights that unlike previous signatories, Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Syria are in a decades-long conflict, and that conflict remains hot. Obstacles include Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights annexed in 2019 under Trump's first presidency and its continued military presence and strikes in southern Lebanon despite ceasefire agreements. Syrian state TV has explicitly stated that negotiations are impossible without Israel's full adherence to the 1974 disengagement agreement. Even a preliminary non-aggression agreement, though seemingly remote, could be a game-changer, according to Borju Ozalik of the Royal United Services Institute, noting recent diplomatic backchannels focused on Syria's economic recovery and deconfliction talks. However, Kelly Petillo, a Middle East researcher at the European Council on Foreign Relations, suggests that Trump's push for peace deals, including a reported ultimatum from Vladimir Putin's top diplomat as a peace deal fell apart, is largely driven by the idea of getting a Nobel Peace Prize rather than genuine diplomatic skill or a deep understanding of regional complexities. Both Quilliam and Petillo agree that Trump is not a peacemaker and his Middle East diplomacy merely papers over cracks, failing to address core issues or contain Israel's maximalist instincts. The confluence of these events paints a complex picture of a global order in flux, heavily influenced by individual leadership and often contradictory diplomatic signals. From the weaponization of dialogue in Ukraine to the ambitious yet fraught pursuit of Mideast peace, a thread of uncertainty runs through current international relations. The strategic implications are profound. Moscow consistently uses Trump's engagement as a strategic theater for military escalation, undermining international norms by militarizing dialogue. This highlights the urgent need for U.S. institutional clarity to prevent freelance diplomacy from subverting official policy and emboldening adversaries. As the world watches, the coming weeks will be critical in determining whether these intricate diplomatic dances lead to de-escalation or further entrench the patterns of conflict, demanding a coordinated and clear transatlantic response to counter the destructive patterns now clearly on display.